Today's daf is daf Chav Hey, and we'll pick it up where we left it off on Chav Daled Amid Beis, 4 lines up from the bottom, Shani Hacha. So let's just introduce this sugya with something that we learned earlier on Chav Daled Amid Beis, so that we can segue into this sugya. The Gemara had a suffix, Mau lahalos minisias kapayim liyuchsin. If we saw a Kohen being noseas kappa bebirchas Kohanim, and now he wants to marry an isha kshera, shall we assume that he's a Kohen kosher based on the fact that he was noseas kappa? And the Gemara quoted a machlokes between Rav Chizda and Rav Avina on this very point. One holds Mailim Minisias Kapayim Liyuchsin, and the other holds Ein Mailim Minisias Kapayim Liyuchsin. And in explaining that machlokes, the Gemara quotes a pasuk in Ezra. And Rabbi Yossi introduces this pasuk in a brisa with the words Gdola Chazaka. How great is it when a person already has a chazaka? He's muchzak. He's constantly doing something, and Beis Din does not have the right to remove him from that chazaka unless there are eidim to testify against that chazaka. And the Gemara is going to spend some amount of time to try to figure out what is Gdola Chazaka in Rabbi Yossi. What does he mean by Gdola Chazaka? But Rabbi Yossi himself quotes this pasuk in Ezra, and the pasuk in Ezra indicates that Nehemiah, who's called Tirshasa, told them that they should not eat from Kodesh Kadoshim, that we have to wait for the Kohen Gadol, who will ask the Urim V'Tumim if these Kohanim are ksherim, and in the meantime, they're not allowed to eat from Kodesh Kadoshim. The Gemara understood that Kodesh Kadoshim is referring to the highest level of Kodshim. And the Gemara therefore is medayek that when Nehemiah said to these Kohanim, Harei atem b'chezkaschem, which means that you're allowed to continue to eat as Kohanim exactly as you ate in the past. Now, in the past, they ate in Bavel. Obviously, there were no Kodshei Kodshim in Bavel. So what did Nehemiah affirm based on Chazaka? Apparently, Kodshei Gvul, which means Truma. So you could eat Truma outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And if they did so, then they created a Chazaka already in Bavel to eat Truma. And now when they come to Eretz Yisrael, Nehemiah calms them down and says you can continue eating Truma, but not Kodesh Kadoshim. So the diuk here is Kodshim Mizbeach, they're not allowed to eat. But apparently Kodshei Gvul, like Truma, they're allowed to eat. And the reason why they're allowed to eat it is because it's a continuation of what they were noeg as Kohanim in the Gola. And if that be the case, then if they were noeg to be noseas kapayim in Bavel, they could continue to do so in Eretz Yisrael because of their chazaka. The Gemara thinks if that be the case, then why not take it one step further? And since we're going to establish their chazaka or reaffirm their chazaka as far as Nesias Kapayim is concerned, then we can mala them to the highest level of yuchsin. We can allow them the status of Kohanim Ksherim as far as marriage laws are concerned. Because otherwise, if you're saying we could not rely on Nesias Kapayim, then it's very confusing that we recognize them as Kohanim for everything but Kodesh Kodashim. Certainly people will come to assume that we could be mata them for marriage as well, and then we'll have a takola. So apparently there is no takola because Mylin be Nesias Kapayim liyuchsin. So that's where we got up to yesterday. And the Gemara now says, no. Shiny hacha de re'iyach eskayu. Although you're right, that normally we'd have to worry about recognizing the status of the Kohanim because it might come to a takola that they'll do it for yuchsin. But in this case, because they're excluded from eating kodshei kodshim, we have no chashash of takola. And why is that? The riach eskayu. We see already that there's a raise on the chazaka because we enjoin them from eating kodesh kodashim. If we were accepting them as kohanim ksherim from A to Z, the entire gamut, then we would certainly have to allow them to eat kodshei kodshim in Eretz Yisrael when the Mikdash is rebuilt. Or, for example, bisman hazeh, we don't eat kodshei mizbeach, so therefore we can be malo them to yuchsin. Isn't this going to be a takola? If you're holding now ein mailim in Nesias Kapayim liyuchsin, no, it's not going to be a takola. The ilo tema hachi leman dior mailim mitruma liyuchsin came of the achli betruma osila skinu. We have another mandiyoma that we had earlier in the Sugan Daf Chav Dalid that we're mala from truma to yuchsin. Well, why aren't you afraid that if you're going to be mala them that if we'll allow them to eat truma in Eretz Yisrael, then automatically we're going to be mala them to yuchsin? And the answer is mishum deriach eskayu, because since they're enjoined from eating kodshim, then we see that they're not like all the other kohanim. They're not going to come to be mala them to yuchsin. And now we start daf Chaf Hey, which is the daf for today. So Gemara asks the following kasha: the Ella, my Gedola Chazaka, Rabbi Yossi in the Brisa said Gedola Chazaka. There must have been some chidush here of Uki Gavra Chezkaso. And Lechora, where is the chidush here? Because if they ate truma in Chutzaretz or they were nosei kapayim, so then we're not going to be mafkia their chazaka, but that doesn't mean that chazaka is so great. It's not as if you went that step further. And based on that chazaka, you were malul yuchsin. So the Gemara says, you know what Rabbi Yossi had in mind when he said Gedola Chazaka, to make kara, before they came to Eretz Yisrael in Bavel, achol b'truma d'Rabbanan, hashta achol b'truma d'Oraisa. There's no din of trumas and maisis in Chutz La'aretz midoraisa. It's only d'Rabbanan. So that which they ate in Chutz La'aretz was only truma d'Rabbanan. The chiddush here of this brisa and Rabbi Yossi's Gedola Chazaka is that from their Chazaka on truma d'Rabbanan, we could upgrade their level, and when they come on Aliyah from Bavel Tetzah, we could allow them to eat truma d'Oraisa, and that's what Nehemiah allowed them to eat. Even Trumas Peros of Eretz Yisrael that are Doraisa. The reason for that is because of the Chazaka of Achilas Truma. We're not going to be mafkia them from eating Truma in Eretz Yisrael, despite the fact that that Truma is Doraisa. So Rabbi Yossi exclaims, Gedola Chazaka, how great is Chazaka, that from the Chazaka that the Kohanim had in Chutzatzi Truma d'Rabbanan, we're going to upgrade them to the status of eating truma d'oraisa. The ibai sema. Another explanation of the brisa. Hashta nami b'truma d'Rabbanan achol b'truma d'oraisa loach. Nehemiah was only mat to them to continue as they did in Chutz La'aretz, to eat trumas yirakos and perasei ilan, which are not included in dagan tirish v'yitz, so they're only a chiv hafrashim midrabbanan. But he would not allow them to eat truma from dagan tirish v'yitza, which is a chiv d'oraisa. That he wasn't mat to them to eat because they didn't have a chazaka to eat truma d'oraisa in Chutz La'aretz and Bavel. So when they get to Eretz Yisrael, we're only going to allow them to eat Trumas Yerakos, etc., which is Truma D'Rabbanan. V'chi maskinon mitruma liyuchsin. Even the Mandiyamu who says machilin mitruma liyuchsin, that's only b'truma d'oraisa, but b'truma d'Rabbanan lo maskinon. So if that be the case, what is Gedolah Chazaka? Because you're telling me that the Chazaka they had is limited, according to this Ibai Sema, to eating Truma D'Rabbanan. We wouldn't upgrade them and allow them to be eating. Nechemia wasn't mad to them to eat Truma D'Oraisa. So where's the Gedolah Chazaka? The Afagav the equal of Migzar Truma D'Oraisa. Lo Gazrinon. Logically, we would have said, let's not even allow them to eat Truma D'Rabbanan and Trumas Yerakos and Perasa Elon in Eretz Yisrael, because if we allow them to eat those Truma D'Rabbanans, then they'll come to eat Truma D'Oraisa. And since we're holding that we can only be mala to Yuchsin if we knew that they had Yuchsin, but in the absence of Edus, we cannot be mala. We're only going to allow them to continue what they did based on their chazak and chutzlarts. We should have made a gzera that if you allow them to eat truma, you give a finger, they'll take a hand. They'll think they're allowed to eat truma d'oraisa. But lo gazrina, somehow the chazaka is powerful enough to prevent or inhibit the chachamim from making this gzera. So Gemara immediately asks, what about the pasuk? Asher lo yochlu mikodesh kadashim. And the diak was mikodesh kadashim udlo achel avitruma d'oraisa achil. So you see that Nehemiah was mat to them to eat truma d'oraisa. So the Gemara answers that when Nehemiah said Asher lo yochlu mikodesh kadashim, he didn't mean one entity, which is called Kodesh Kadashim, Kodesh / or hyphenated Kodshim. He meant Kodesh and Kadashim as two separate entities. Hachikama. Lo, b'midei, they're not permitted to eat b'midei deikri Kodesh, which is referring to Truma d'Oraisa. K'dichsiv v'chol zar lo yochal Kodesh in the parsha of Truma. V'lo b'midei the ikre kodshim, and not kodshim is beach that are given to the Kohen. And now the Gemara quotes a pasuk in the parsha of a Bas Kohen who gets married to a non-Kohen in order to prove that kodshim is called truma, or I should say it the other way around, that truma is called kodshim. Dechsiv Bas Kohen kisia le'ich zar. So how do we understand Trumas Kodshim? I mean, after all, Truma is Truma, Kodshim is Kodshim. Truma is Kodshim full, and Kodshim is Kodshim is Peach. Omar Mar, how do we interpret this Trumas Kodshim? B'mura mina Kodshim, which is Chazav lo Sochel. But Truma, that they can come and eat, when they come, or she could go and eat truma when she gets back to Beis Avia. And therefore, the pasuk is to be interpreted that Nehemiah prohibited them from eating both truma d'oraisa, which is called kodesh, and kodshei mizbeach, which is called kodshim. So the only heter that we had was to eat truma d'Rabbanan in Eretz Yisrael. But you'll ask me, so what's Gedolah Chazaka? And the answer is that the Chazaka impedes the Gzera of Truma D'Rabbanan Atu Truma D'Oraisa. So we're again going to try to quote a proof that Mailami Nesias Kapayim Liyuchsin Chazaka Lekahuna Nesias Kapayim B'Bavel. There's a Chazaka for the Kohanim, and that is that they were Nesias Kapayim B'Bavel. And that gives them a chazaka of a Kohen kosher. Now we have to add a very important point here. And we're going to see this in the next price that the Gemara is going to quote. In Bavel, they set up what's called a Bezdin Kavua. And the purpose and the responsibility of that Bezdin Kavua was to check out and siphon out the Kohen and make sure that only Kohenim Miuchasim would be Noseas Kapayim. And it's not Dafka Bavel, it's any place on the face of the earth where there's a Bezdin Kavua. And it's all based on the Siyas Kapayim, which is public in nature. Avol Achal Truma Bavel, that's not a proof because Truma in Bavel is only D'Rabbanan. So the Isur Zar is not so chamur. And not only that, Achilas Chala B'Surya. So for this, we have to know about a sugya called Kibush Yachid. And we're holding now the Kibush Yachid Shmei Kibush, which means that when David HaMelech conquered Surya, he had not yet conquered all of the main body of Eretz Yisrael. That's called Kibush Yachid. And if we hold that Kibush Yachid generates Kedusha, then in that area called Surya, there would be a Chiyuv Chala D'Oraisa. And therefore, if this Kohen was eating Chala in Surya, he has a Chezkas Kohen, because as we said before, in Surya, based on the halach, the principle of Kibush Yachid Shmei Kibush, there is Kedushas Eretz Yisrael Inyan Chiyuv, Trumos, Masros, and Chala. And that would mean that if a Zar would eat Chala in Surya, he'd be Chayv Misa B'dei Shamayim, if he wasn't a Kohen. V'chiluk matanos b'krachim. Matanos here refers to Zrola Chayim V'keva. And if this Kohen takes his part in Zrola Chayim V'keva, which again is something public that's divvied up out there in the gigantic shvakim, the marketplaces, that gives him a cheskes Kohen, because if he wasn't a real true Kohen, he would not have the chutzpah, the ha'azas panim, to receive matnas kahuna in that public area called the shvakim gedolim of the krachim. Somebody's going to recognize him, and maybe it's one of the travelers, and he's people traveling through, and they're going to say, hey, this guy's not a Kohen. Why is he taking Drol Chayayim V'Keva? So he's embarrassed to do so, to get caught. Apparently, he actually believes that he's a Kohen kosher. In any event, Ketani Miyas, we see in this brisa that Nesias Kapayim, so Chazaka L'Kahuna is Nesias Kapayim, and that's going to give him the Chazaka that he's a Kohen kosher, my lovely Yuchsin, so that now he can marry a girl. And she's a Kshera, based on this Chazaka. So we see that according to the Mandiyomar, Mailim Minisias Kapayim Liyuchsin, we have a raya from this brisa. Lo, the Gemara rejects it. You could reinterpret the brisa. And what does it mean that we give him a chazaka based on the Siyas Kapayim in Bavel? That's only litruma, only to eat truma. And even truma, we're going to say that the fact that he was no Siyas Kappa, that's all chacha, that establishes him as a Kohen Kosh as far as Achilas Truma, but not as far as Yuchsin is concerned. Now, why is it more logical to give him a Chazak of Achilas Truma based on the Siyas Kapayim, but we're not going to give him a Chazak as far as Yuchsin is concerned? And this has to do with the sugi that we learned way back in the first parak on Daf Yud Gimel called Maila Asu B'Yuchsin. So the Gemara asks the following kasha: is it possible to interpret the brisa the way that you interpreted it? The brisa has Nesias Kapayim B'Bavel and Achilas Chala B'Surya. And we should make an equation between the two that are mentioned in the brisa B'Vasachas in one breath. The Nesias Kapayim in Bavel to be similar to Achilas Chala in Surya. Ma Achilas Chala L'Yuchsin. We know that in Surya we have a chazaka that a person's a Kohen, even if he wants to marry a Jewish girl, but kasher is she's ksher and he's kosher. If you're not going to be machil him b'truma, then, or I should say, if you're going to be machal only betruma, then that's not a chiddush, because challah itself is included in truma, and it's given to the kohen. He already had a chazak of eating truma, he has a chazak ipso facto of eating challah. But the Bryce is mashma that achilas challah is going to generate for him on his behalf a chazak of kahuna in something addition to challah, something that goes beyond challah. And what is that? And that is to give him a chazak of a kohen kosher. And therefore, afnasias kapayim, which is quoted immediately together with achilas challah in the brisa, it should have the same exact din and machzikin lekuna liyuchsin. Gemara rejects it low. Achilas challah gufa litruma. It only gives him a chazak as far as eating truma, but not as far as yuchsin is concerned. Because savar challah bisman hazeh d'rabbanon utruma d'oraisa maskina michallah d'rabbanon utruma d'oraisa. Now the Gemara is going to go into a long discussion on the bottom of this omid as to why challah is d'oraisa, whereas truma is only d'rabbanon. Bisman hazeh. And the chiddush of this brisa is that if the kohen was used to eating challah, which is only d'rabbanon, just 1 second, wait a minute. Right, I may have made a mistake. I don't know what I said before, but challah bisman hazeh, because the pasuk b'voachem in chutz la'aretz is d'rabbanon. I shouldn't mention chutz la'aretz because it's the same thing in Eretz Yisrael. Truma bisman hazeh doesn't have b'voachem, and therefore it's d'oraisa bisman hazeh. That's based on kedusha shniya kitchel and shaita the kitchel love. So again, as we said before, in Bavel, when the Kohanim came around to eat chaz v'shok or to get truma or to get challah, there was a bezdin kavua, and it was the job of the bezdin kavua to supervise and make sure that if he's eating challah d'rabbanan, he is considered a kohen. He must be a kohen kosher. That's what they're going to check out. They're going to investigate. Because again, if you're going to allow them to eat challah, which is only d'rabbanan, they'll come to eat truma, which truma we said is d'oraisa. And how do we know that challah bisman says d'rabbanan and truma is d'oraisa? Kida apich lehu Rav Huna braid Rav Yeshua Rabbanan. That was what Rav Huna said to the Rabbanan. Mahapich means hefech divrei, the opposite of what they said, and that's going to be Yemir Hashem our next sugya here for today. In any event, let's just summarize the three dinim that we learned from the brisa of machzikim bahem lekahuna, or whether it's letruma or leyuchsin. Number one, nesias kapayim bebavel, because of the bezdin kavua. Number two, achilas truma, where truma is de'oraisa. Like for example, Surya, if you hold kibush yachid shmei kibush. And finally, taking matnas kahuna like zroel l'chayim b'keva in public in the shvakim. And now we want to bring a raya to be poshet out suffik, whether mailim mi nesias kapayim liyuchsin. Tashma chazaka lakuna nesias kapayim chilagronos the Eretz Yisrael ubesurya ubechol mokum sheshlukei bezdin magiyim l'sham Rosh Chodesh. Okay, fine. Today is Rosh Chodesh, so it's not coincidental. We're going to learn a little bit about Rosh Chodesh. So the Brisa opens up with two words. That's the introduction. Chazaka lakun. In the following way, we can give a person a chazaka for kuhun. Number one, if he's nosias kapayim. Number two, if he receives trumos from the granos in Eretz Yisrael, that's a chiv truma d'oraisa. So if he receives Truma in the Goren, he's Muchsa Bekuna. And Besurya, it doesn't have anything to do with the Goren, but Bechol Mokom. I'm sorry, Ubesurya, because they ate Truma in Surya, and he got through that Achilas Truma in Surya, he received and upgraded to a Chazaka Likuhuna. And then Kol Makom, any place which is in Chodesh, Shluchei Bezdin Rosh Chodesh Magiyim. So who are these Shluchei Bezdin Rosh Chodesh? When the Bezdin in Eretz Yisrael decided to be Mekadosh the Chodesh, make it into a mole, or a Chodesh Me'ubar, or a Chaser, once that decision was made, then Bezdin would send out shluchim to tell everyone in all the lands that were close to Eretz Yisrael within a 15-day journey, and they would tell the people when exactly it's Rosh Chodesh, they would know when to celebrate the Moadim. So that was the deal with the shluchei Bezdin. Then the Brisa says, Nesias Kapayim Raya, that Nesias Kapayim is also a proof to establish a chazaka of a Kohen Kosher. Why? Because the Shluchei Bezdin reached 15 days journey from Yerushalayim, and there was a Bezdin Kavua that would always receive the edus of the Shluchim to the effect that they were Mekadosh the Chodesh. We needed a Bezdin, which was Kavua, to receive the edus. And therefore we go back to the original svara that a person claiming he's a Kohen would not have the Aziz Panim to be Noseas Kapov unless he really knew he was a Kohen. Because Bezdin are going to check him out. They're not going to allow him to be Noseas Kapov until they determine that he's a real bona fide Kohen. Avalo Chiluk Granos. You can't prove a thing from the fact that the Truma in the granaries were divvied up to this person, and he got his portion of Truma, because again, we're talking about Truma d'Rabbanan, Ubi Bavel. Now, even though Bavel is very far away from Eretz Yisrael, it takes more than 15 days to get there. The Shluchei Bezdin did not get there, but nevertheless, Bavel has the same status as Kesuria with regard to Nesias Kapayim. And if he was Noseas Kapov in Bavel, like in Syria, he is Muchsak for Kahuna. Why? Because there's a Bezdin Kavu in Bavel. And that's the Shita here, the Tanakama of Chimagam Liel Omer. I have another area in the world to add to this halacha of Mailim, and that is Alexandria Shel Mitzrayim, which was a gigantic metropolis. There were hundreds of thousands of Jews living there after the Churban Bayis Rishon. And Barishona, before the Romans were machriv the entire Yishuv in Alexandria, then he would be muchsak b'kahuna by virtue of the fact that he was Noseas Kapayim, even though it's further from Eretz Yisrael, more than a 15-day journey, but they should Bezdin Kvuim Sham in Alexandria. Ktani Mias Nesias Kapayim my lovely Yuchsin. Right, we saw this price that says you can be machzikin lakuna based on Nesias Kapayim. L'chor, it means hasio isha kshera. And this becomes now a kasha on the man. The Yomuk says ein mailim in Nesias Kapayim Yuchsin. And Gemara says lo lechala. Azok is only as far as feeding him chala and truma, but not as far as yuchsin. So the Gemara asks, for Aduvia the Chila Granos Ketani Ma Chila Granos Liyufsin after Sias Kapayim Liyufsin. So the Gemara assumes and doesn't even blink about this premise that Nesias Kapayim has the same status as Chila Granos, and that Chila Granos is a chazaka for yuchsin, and therefore even the Siyas Kapayim that's mentioned here together with Chiluk Granos is a chazaka yuchsin. Gemara says lo, Chiluk Granos gufa lechala. And why is that so? Why are we machzikim to eat challah? And the answer is because savar tshuva b'zman hazeh derabbanan v'challah da'oraisa, which is the opposite of what we said before. But we'll see. The Gemara is going to go back and forth on this. Umaskina mitzvah derabbanan l'challah da'oraisa. We have this generic entity called truma, which includes both challah and truma. And even though he was only eating truma d'Rabbanan, nevertheless, that's enough to allow him to eat challah d'oraisa, as we saw of Huna Breder of Yushul Rabbanan, he said to Rabbanan. So it means that even according to the Man Yomi, that truma b'zman hazeh is only a chiyuv d'Rabbanan, nevertheless, we could be mala him through the chazaka to a chiyuv challah min haTorah. Now, why is truma b'zman hazeh d'Rabbanan and challah b'zman hazeh is d'oraisa? The Yomer of Huna Breder Rabbi Shashka Chtinu l'Rabbanan b'Bei Rav the Yasvei v'Komer afilu l'man the Yomer truma b'zman hazeh d'Rabbanan challah b'zman hazeh is d'oraisa, and I'll prove it to you. Because during the 14 years in which Yoshua, 7 years for kibush and 7 years for chiluk, is nischayvu b'chal. Why is this so? When they entered into Eretz Yisrael, they became chayev and chala for all posterity. And this is all based on the word bivachem in the parsha of chala, in parsha Shlach. And what does b'bachem mean? It means bia b'miktas. It doesn't say in the pasuk ki tavo or ki yaviacha as it says elsewhere, which is mashma bia chashuva, but rather b'bachem, which is a bia b'miktas. So the pasuk b'bachem indicates that immediately when they entered into the land, even before they conquered the land and divvied it up, they were already chayev and chal. B'bachem al arts. V'lo nischayev b'truma. In truma it says tfuas zaracha, and that's only after kibush v'chiluk after the 14 years, but not immediately when they entered into the land, because it doesn't say b'vachem, but rather it says tfuas zaracha. And there's no chiyuv to be mafresh shuvas and maisris until the tfuah grows in the field that's designated for that zera. That's called tfuah zaracha. And that's only feasible after kibush v'chiluk at the end of the 14 years. So every Jew got his chelik in Eretz Yisrael. And this is how the Rabbanan proved that the chiyuv challah b'zman hazeh is min haTorah, because the chiyuv challah is not at all dependent upon Yerusha via Shiva like Trumas of Maisros, but rather Knisa la'aretz. So even in this day, today, contemporary life, that the Jewish people are not necessarily en masse living in Eretz Yisrael, there's no chiyuv Trumas of Maisros min haTorah, but yet the chayev and challah when from the moment Yoshua entered into the land, as it says in the pasuk b'bachem. So from that moment in time of b'bachem, they're chayev min haTorah, and that's mechayev even b'zman hazeh. However, Rav Huna, although he heard this from the Rabbanan, he was not a happy camper. Amin al-Chana, if you would ask me, says Rav Huna, adarabah, I would come to the other extreme. Chalaf certainly is only the Rabbanan. Tesanya, we learned in the Brisa with regard to Chiyuv Hafrashas Chala, Bivachem El Haaretz, which means Bia B'Miktsas, Bivachem Yachal Yischayvu Yisrael, B'Chala, immediately when they entered into the Midbar after they left Mitzrayim, Mishenichnasu La Shnayim Ushloshim Meraglim. What shaykh is in the Midbar? They have a key of B'Bachem El Haaretz. So the Gemara says because 2 or 3 Meraglim, meaning the first Meraglim that took the front, they entered into Eretz Yisrael. That's already called the B'Bachem El Haaretz. That's Miktas Bia Eretz Yisrael. What's B'Bachem? B'Loshen Rabim. B'Bias Kulchem Amarti V'Lo B'Bias Miktsasam V'Chiaskinu Ezra. So now we're saying from the word B'Bachem in the plural that the Chiyuv Chal depends not just on 1 or 2 Jews entering into the land, but rather depends on Bias Kulchem. And Bias Miktas is not sufficient. And yet, when Ezra brought the people of Israel from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, the first Nefesh B'Nefesh plane that landed, Lav Kulei Solik on the top of Chafayim Bays, only 43,000 Jews joined Ezra. Most of the Jews remained behind in Bavel. And therefore, it's not Bias Kulchem L'chayev B'Chal. Because Lav Kulei Solik. We don't have Kol Yisrael at the time of Ezra.